And it's a pretty big project, so what I'm going to try and do is throw out ideas. Yeah. So it may not be completely joined up stuff, because it's as I say, it's a big issue which straddles both interests in business as well as political science. And the core questions that I started with on this, and which I suppose to some extent is still the core questions. You know, one, why are we hearing so much about corporate responsibility? I mean, why is it, for me anyway, everywhere that I look? So what is it that's driving this? The second one was the idea of globalization and corporate responsibility. I was keen to see what the linkages were between globalization and the rise of this interest in corporate responsibility. In a way, is there a direct correlation? A third question is, you know, are the global norms developing for these big corporations? So can we actually see this, not just corporate responsibility, but key norms, values? Is there something that's taking place which is bringing corporations together in terms of their practices? And then the fourth question, which I have to throw out as a cynic, is, you know, is this just a giant hoax? You know, is this just crazy stuff? Is this a con game brought together by, you know, global capital to hoodwink us? And you know, I suppose, to be honest, that was probably the more important of the four questions at the beginning. But in terms of, you know, quick answers, I have to say that I'm more inclined to say it's not quite a giant hoax. Clearly there's problems, but I think at the same time there is some important movement here in terms of what globalization is taking place, what global corporations are doing, what these norms are. I'm not going to say they're solid, but I think there is something to look at here that's important. I think also, just to start off as a kind of a preamble, I think it is going to increase in importance. I don't think it's going to go away. My sense is that it's here and it will become more significant. It does involve already hundreds and hundreds of corporations, so it's not just 2 or 3 here or 2 or 3 there, but literally hundreds of the world's largest corporations. So again, something happening. It also involves, you know, most of the world's largest organizations, global organizations, UN system, and so on. And I also think that it has pretty significant importance for things like sustainability. So if we want to talk about sustainability in any meaningful way, we're drawn back to corporate responsibility and its linkages there. Climate change, if we want to talk about climate change, I think we're also drawn to looking at corporate practice and even global development. I think increasingly institutions are saying, well, if we really want to move ahead in development, we also have to somehow impact the nature of global corporations. So it's important in its own right, but I think it does touch on a lot of the other important issues of this decade and beyond. Still some issues though. Selective membership. Not everybody's involved in this. It's voluntary. Pretty much all of these corporate responsibility mechanisms are voluntary, largely self-policing, which is obviously a warning sign in itself. There's a lack of enforcement, and so I'm not sure that this sort of name and shame, which a lot of it depends upon, is enough. I also think that there's more of a role for the state in this, that pretty much this is corporations doing things that they say they want to do, but I think we could see more of a role for governments, and we're not at this point, so that's also a concern. Second part, it's second part of 6, so you can dig yourself in and time me as we go through here. Yeah. A little bit about the theory and the methodology, and basically I came to this thinking in terms of neoliberal institutionalism. I'm a great, you know, regimes kind of guy, and I thought, well, here we have some kind of, you know, regime that's developing, that's being created, that's bringing about certain standards and so on. But the more I looked at it, the more it didn't seem to quite fit, because it's less of a top-down and more of a bottom-up. There's less pressure from states. There's less movement at that level that seems to be pushing this. And a lot of it depends upon changing values. And so increasingly, I'm pretty much locked into a constructivist approach here, that I think that helps to explain more of what's going on and helps to provide some direction to what I'm looking at. And so a core idea is strategic social constructivism, kind of a three-part stage, which seems to fit what's going on here. First of all, the desire to create new norms. Okay, you've got to build new norms. Then you've got to spread those norms, and then you've got to institutionalize them. And I think in terms of what we see going on in corporate responsibility, CSR, we see those three stages, taking place. Talking about norm entrepreneurs, I think that very nicely takes in the role of NGOs who are very much at the forefront of pushing for CSR, different advocacy groups. These are the core pressure points, I think, which are driving corporations to react. I think within constructivism we can also see what's going on in terms of the challenge and the change to existing ways of thinking about the relationship of business and society. I think that's also something that's going on. Again, I'm not quite sure where we are on that, but clearly this is a relationship of business to society, and so social constructivism helps that. In a way, we're trying to change what is the industry standard. We're trying to change the norm for how businesses should operate. The other thing that's interesting, which I'll throw out again as a kind of a question, a lot of people debate why is it that the corporations are doing this? And in a way, constructivism might tell us, well, it doesn't really matter. The end result is what matters. And I don't know. I mean, I'll throw that one out. But we could say that so long as corporations act in a better manner, does it really matter the reason why? Does it matter what their interests are, so long as they're behaving better? And that's something that I'm kind of struggling with, but we'll throw that out. In terms of some of the methodological problems, they're quite immense, really, and maybe Carol can whack me into shape here. But, I mean, cause and effect, right away, there's a problem. Why is it happening? Why are these things taking place? Where are the pressure points? It's very difficult to see that and try and judge. How do we measure compliance? What is compliance? Just because a company says it's doing stuff, does that mean it is doing stuff? Just because you put it in an annual report, does it mean anything? So, what is compliance? How do we measure it? What is success? What is the threshold for success? What is perfect corporate behavior? Will we ever see that in our lifetimes? And so, you've got those issues. When is enough enough? And those are quite tricky. The other thing about corporate responsibility, if you look at a lot of the stuff, it's quite amazing who gets in there as being on the top of the list for corporate responsibility. And it always interests me that corporations that we often love to hate, like McDonald's or Walmart, in many indices are seen as some of the best corporations for corporate responsibility. And so clearly the people who are doing those surveys have got a different set of benchmarks to some of us who are doing other surveys. So trying to decide on what we actually mean when we study this is I think a real problem. Number 3. So moving along, I mean, as I said at the beginning, one of the core things that got me into this was the interest in globalization and how we can maybe make that linkage between the increase of globalization and the increase of the interest in corporate responsibility. And I don't want to get into the debate about when did globalization start, because I think you can make a great case that it's been going on for decades and centuries and so on. Certainly back to the old British Empire and what have you. But I think most of us would accept that it's also relatively recent in its current nature and current form. And I think for me, several things come in here. There's the centrality of corporations in global capitalism. So I think there is clearly a direct linkage there between what corporations are doing and the nature of global capitalism. And I think also the technology which is driving modern day globalization is also the technology which is driving modern day corporate responsibility, and the groups which are monitoring it. The ability to name and shame globally, the ability to get that information out to the global community virtually instantaneously, and the way to get that information out cheaply has allowed these advocacy groups the ability to monitor and track and keep tabs, keep pressure on corporations unlike anything previously. So I think, in certain ways we can see right now that globalization has had a direct impact on the creation of this new move toward corporate responsibility. Other things that crop up in terms of the opposition to globalization, and I've got a list here, the idea of the race to the bottom, cultural degradation, distortions and bubbles of global capitalism, Ritz's McDonaldization thesis, dehumanization of work, sweatshops, outsourcing, global environmental damage. All of the things that people look at relatively negatively in terms of what globalization is doing also fits very much into the CSR framework. And so I think it's not only that technology exists, but what is taking place, or the negative implications of globalization, are a direct feed into the movement towards demanding greater corporate responsibility. Okay, so in a way, CSR is one of the strategies, I would argue, in terms of the resistance to globalization, as much as the corporations themselves responding to that. So it's a two-way. Corporations are protecting themselves, but it's also very much used by those opposing corporations and, in a way, opposing globalization to be able to try and put some markers down